Okay, wow. We just got hit with a brick worth of new information on Elden Ring. This all comes from articles posted by IGN of a really long interview with Hidetaka Miyazaki. These interviews, holy shit, there is so much information that just came out. So what I'm going to do during this video is unpack some of what we saw during these interviews, tell you about the major differences of gameplay, storytelling, and how they're building this world to be character-driven and open. But not only that, I'll also tell you about some of the more controversial changes, like Pokemon Souls, I guess. We'll get to that. One of the coolest things I thought came out of this interview was the praise that Miyazaki himself had for George R.R. Martin. Beginning, they were worried and they wanted to make it very clear for George that game systems will come first, which, holy shit, super respect for that. They apparently didn't run into that issue at all. They were 100% in agreement from the start. And George R.R. Martin was involved from the very beginning, and his world building influenced all of their decisions, including how they built out the gameplay systems and the way the world interconnects. This allowed them to, instead of imposing restrictions on what they could and couldn't do in the game, but opened up and gave them inspiration on how to continue forward and how to create this really interesting world, which we now know what it's called too. The name of the place that we play in the game is called The Lands Between, and that name was actually came up with by George R.R. Martin. And as Miyazaki says, it's supposed to be very mysterious and very ethereal. And I think it kind of fits that, but it also fits in with the theme that From Software has explored so many times in the past, of multiple lands converging. This we see super clearly in Dark Souls 3 with Lothric. Aside from the name, the foundation of the story was obviously came up with by George R.R. Martin, which takes the Elden Ring and tells you what it's for and really what it did and what it does. The other thing that we found out was the name of that giant tree that we saw in the trailer. It's the Erd tree. And here's where it gets really interesting. Apparently, between the Erd tree and the Elden Ring, these two artifacts once provided blessings to people across the land. But over time, as things happen in From Software games, a group of people began to lose those blessings, and they became known as the Tarnished. These people were then banished and lived outside of the lands for generations until a history-changing moment, they say. When the Elden Ring was shattered, the blessings began to return to the Tarnished. So this is the main thing that we're seeing. That's where we're going to come in at, essentially. This is the pivotal moment in the history of this game's universe. And this is where we come in at. As one of the Tarnished, we're going to be coming back to our ancestral home and seeing the effects of the Elden Ring being shattered. One quick side note. The story from this game, Elden Ring, will be really different from what we're used to with other From Software games. Not extremely different, but this story is going to be more character-driven and less about just the pure atmospheric storytelling and world building that we're used to from games like Dark Souls or even Bloodborne. But there's going to be many characters that will be similar to, leaders or demigods, etc. And these characters are all going to be really main parts of how the story is told. Seeing them develop and seeing their dialogue and emotions will give you a little bit more upfront than what we're used to with From Software games. Now here's the kicker. When the Elden Ring was shattered, some of these powerful creatures and demigods of these lands inherited the power of the Elden Ring, and it caused them to fall into madness. And this is going to be the main thing we'll see when we come back to our ancestral home of the Lands Between, is these creatures, these demigods, these leaders turn to madness by the shattering of the Elden Ring. That, I think, will be really interesting, and I think we can point out some things in the trailer as well already that we can see this in. I mean, just look at this. What the hell is wrong with this guy? The only thing I can think of is he was drove to madness. And he looks like somebody who's royal or a leader, or maybe even directly responsible for the Tarnished being banished. To be fair, overall, we're not coming back to a world that looks like it's doing well. Things don't look like they're going very well just by some of these scenes that we see in the trailer. And keep in mind, we've been banished from these lands. These are our ancestral lands. We've been banished from them, and we're coming back. And I think this is where the beauty and where the real potential for this game lies. Just to make the obvious comparison, when anybody ever says open world, they think of Zelda Breath of the Wild. But Zelda Breath of the Wild was meant and designed to give you this sense of scale and scope and freedom. However, this is also, and by this I mean Elden Ring, has also been designed to do the same thing. You're coming back to your ancestral lands in this giant open area, and you have freedom to do whatever you want. And if that is nailed down correctly, this could lead to some of the most interesting and fun gameplay that we've had in any game since Breath of the Wild itself. My only hope is that this sense of freedom and exploration is not filled with just empty, meaningless areas. That's my concern. However, I'm really not too worried, and I'll tell you why. In Breath of the Wild, I always wished that they would have these super unique individual areas, and that the open world itself would serve as a dungeon. However, we didn't quite see that. You have the Divine Beasts, which are like self-contained areas, and there are some places that serve as like an open world dungeon. The greatest example would be Eventide Island, which is basically a big open world dungeon. However, in Elden Ring, Miyazaki himself stated that there's 6 individual domains. Each will house its own mainline dungeon map, which seamlessly connects to the lands between. And there's even a hub that's not unlike Firelink Shrine or Majula, etc. And I think that is what makes me so excited. The map itself, your open world that you explore, will connect directly into these dungeons in each one of these 6 individual domains. Now, I'm hoping that these are so super varied and unique that it keeps it fresh, and I think that I have all the hopes in the world for them. If anybody can accomplish something like this, it would be From Software. Another comment from Miyazaki himself that makes me worry a little bit less about the world just being padded with empty nothingness are from what he's talking about with random events that happen throughout the map. You'll come across a variety of catacombs, castles, and fortresses, which are interspersed throughout the whole map, as well as random events and things that will just be going on that have nothing to do with the player, but you can come across them. And we see a good example in the trailer itself of the player character coming across this, looks like a caravan of some sort. And I think this will be really cool, as it will add a really unique set of places to explore that aren't part of the main storyline, and events to see. Hopefully there's more than just the caravan that we can come across and decide what we want to do. Maybe we just go right past them. Maybe we don't feel like dealing with them right now. Maybe we do, and there's something really interesting that we didn't see before. I think that'll just add more content to the world. Now, what we don't have any idea of is the scope of the size of the world. We don't know if it'll be as big as Breath of the Wild, or any other open world game for that example. But I feel like they should make it as big as they're comfortable with. I don't want them to overextend themselves and create this massive, giant map that's 7 times the size of Skyrim and is filled with nothing. I'd rather them make a game that's as big as they're comfortable making with the level of quality that they'll be happy with, and us happy with as well. Now, one of the last things I want to talk about is the gameplay of Elden Ring itself. So essentially, From Software has done its best to make this game and its gameplay structured around its open world in a way that gives you constant feelings of progression, and not that you're just getting stuck. Some really notable ways: there's a lot less emphasis on the stamina bar, and they didn't want the stamina bar to make you feel limited, and combat's going to be longer than we're used to. So there's more ways to heal, and apparently finding items and materials throughout the world will allow you to find additional ways to heal. There's a stealth mechanic. It is relatively simple, but it will allow you to set yourself up in really creative ways for, let's say, a backstab, or getting the jump on an enemy group. The player will see themselves having the ability to change their skills frequently, and at will, I believe. And there's about 100 skills in total. So I think this is a really cool change because I loved the skill system in Sekiro. You can really build your character different ways and play in different ways depending on which skills you go for. But allowing you to have a pretty much free choice between over 100 different skills that you can find and collect and buy. And I believe their skills, quote unquote, include magic as well. Will give you really interesting ways to handle different bosses and different groups of enemies depending on how quickly you can change them. But of note, they do mention that you can buy and learn skills at stores or NPCs. So we do know that there will be stores in this game, which maybe was obvious. I don't think there's ever been a From Software game without a store in it, but it's interesting to note. I wonder what form they'll take. If there'll be towns, if there'll be random NPCs that are hiding in a corner that you find, you're like, oh shit, do you want some stuff? Etc. But you'll be able to find skills, you'll be able to find magic, etc. hidden maybe in those little catacombs or fortresses along the map, maybe from bosses. So I'm sure they'll have a really robust system there, just as they've always had in the past. One of the coolest things was that we can craft and customize items on the go. So you'll be able to collect materials, you'll be able to collect things, and make your own items, and customize them, and not have to be tied to a specific place on the map or a home hub. And I think the ability to do this on the go is critical because in this open world, there's nothing that could really take away from the sense of progression and constant exploration than having to tie yourself back to a certain place to customize your character. And this allows me to sit in front of a catacomb and say, oh, well, I'm going into a catacomb. I'm going to do XYZ because this will be more apt to fighting in a catacomb. And that makes me feel really excited. That'll be a great change to keep players moving along and giving me a sense of progression and not tying me back to a central area. Despite there is going to be a central area, they've said it. And that's great, and I think that's critical for a game like this, but you're not tied to it so much. For me, I'm imagining how cool it would be in Breath of the Wild if I didn't have to head back to a pre-located cooking pot to make a meal every time, where I could just make a meal in the middle of the woods if I wanted to. So as we close here, I just want to talk about the last feature, which I think is the most interesting, potentially damaging, and maybe most controversial feature of the game discussed so far. When you defeat enemies, you'll be able to capture their souls. And with their souls, on demand, you'll be able to summon them in battle. The term that keeps getting thrown around on the IGN interview is Pokemon. I mean, Jesus. But what it seems like more to me is comparable to what happened in every other From Software game. Before a boss, you'll see a little summon sign or something on the ground. You can summon an NPC to help you fight that boss, take that feature, and then expand it to be able to capture the souls of enemies you defeat, and then summon those enemies as friendly NPCs to assist you whenever you want. Seems like a natural evolution to that. And then on top of that, being able to capture the souls of enemies you fight will give you some more strategic elements, being able to find certain enemies that would be useful in one place, and certain enemies that would be useful in another. For example, if I'm fighting a heavily shielded opponent, I'd want some enemy to assist me that has a very heavy weapon to maybe set them off balance or break their shield or however that works. So I think that feature might be awesome. This, again, like I said, may be really cool, and I'm excited to try it out, but this could be one of the most controversial features. What I'm curious about is if the asynchronous PvE and PvP of the game will make a return in similar ways to how it did in the past. What I mean by that is, can we still summon friendly NPCs into our game at some point? Or will it be limited to these summon enemy NPCs to assist you and the co-op? Now, the last thing I'll mention is that there is co-op in this game. So even if you're limited to these enemy NPCs that you can summon for assistance, and not the traditional, I can just summon a buddy into my gameplay for a little while, if they take that system, completely get rid of it, and then replace it with this co-op system, I'll be more happy. Because that's something I've always disliked about the asynchronous PvE in past From Software games. This co-op system, if implemented properly, and I can literally just play the game with my friends, that would be a huge improvement. And I hope that's how they do it. Now, we went over a lot of stuff in this video, and there really was a lot to unpack from Miyazaki's interview. But if you learned something new, subscribe down below and tell me in the comments what you learned. Now, at the end of the day, whatever comes out with Elden Ring, I'm going to appreciate. I think it's really awesome for developers, especially ones that I love, to take risks on big, open, and new kinds of games. So I'm going to support From Software, and I'm probably going to enjoy this game anyway, even if it's just Dark Souls with horses. But I hope and I think that this will be a lot more than that. So looking forward to when the game comes out, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Anyway, take it easy, y'all.